Good morning. I hope you're all doing well and staying healthy. I hope everything is wonderful and great in your world this week. For our lesson today, we're going to read the last part of the last book of Philippians. We are on week 8. It is the last week in our study through the book of Philippians. And one of the things I love about this book is that the content doesn't drop off at the end. In fact, the last half of the last chapter probably has more packed into it than any of the other ones that we've taken care of. Paul just doesn't seem to stop. He's so full of joy. He's so full of passion. So let's read it and jump in and see what God wants to tell us today. We're picking up in Philippians chapter 4, verse 10. And Paul is writing to these people at the church of Philippi. They are close friends of his, and he is writing from prison, where they have sent someone to go and visit him and support him. He says, "I rejoiced greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it." Right? Paul, again, here we see this word rejoice. He doesn't seem to stop having joy. And the source of his joy this time is that others would show concern for him. Here, according to the text, the Philippians, they were concerned for Paul because of his imprisonment and all the troubles that he's had. It's a little more clear later on down in the chapter. But they didn't have an opportunity to reach out to him until this time when they could send one of their own, Epaphroditus, to come and visit Paul. So Paul continues on. He says, "I'm not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty." So Paul has been in situations where he's been hungry. He's been in need of support and not knowing where he's going to sleep, not knowing where he's going to eat. But he's also been in places and times where he's had more than enough. And he's counting this right now, even though he's in prison, he's counting this as one of those times when he has more than enough. He says, I'm not in need right now. And a big part of that is because the Philippians have sent support to Paul very recently, and we'll see that here soon. I'm going to repeat myself in verse 12. "I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in every and any situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength." Now that might be a very familiar verse to you. You might have seen that, Philippians 4:13, "I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength." That's a very misunderstood verse sometimes because people want to apply it by saying, whatever my goal is, whatever I'm striving for, I know that I can accomplish my goal because God gives me strength. But that's not really what it says at all. In fact, when Paul wrote it, he was talking about the circumstances of life, that sometimes everything is easy and sometimes everything is hard, but I can handle whatever life throws my way because God gives me strength. It's not about going out and conquering some goal. It's about being able to handle the obstacles of life. Paul was a missionary, and missionaries need help. Whether it's a place to stay or money to provide for their needs. It was not uncommon for Paul and his friends and the people who traveled with him to receive gifts from the churches that they visited. We also know that Paul earned a living as a tent maker. He would sew the canvas together to make tents. And it seems like from here and other passages in the Bible that he had partners who helped him support his missionary journeys. And so we see that the Philippians have been a big support in that as well. You know, Paul had some times when he was in need, probably a lot of times where he didn't know the next place he was going to spend the night. And occasionally he had plenty. Maybe he was staying in some place for a long time. He could settle in, get comfortable, earn an income. Certainly during the days before he knew Jesus, he was comfortable. But Paul says that no matter what, he knew how to be content. And the source of that contentment was Jesus. It was knowing that he had the promise of God taking care of us, right? That the promises of God that we will not lack for food or clothing or shelter. Now, those promises, when we look at the world around us, it's kind of hard to reconcile those promises. Jesus said, look at the flowers and the birds and see all of creation and how God takes care of those things. Aren't you more important than a bird? Well, the bird doesn't worry about where it's going to find its next meal. It just goes out and gets it. So should you worry? Jesus is saying, no, you shouldn't worry about that. And yet, in our world today, people are hungry. People have a need. There is a problem of poverty and hunger and starvation in our world. Does that mean that God's not keeping his promise? Well, I don't believe that. I believe that the problem with our world is that there are too many people who have more than enough who do not care for those who do not have enough. I believe that God put the people in Paul's life to support his journey. And God puts us as people who have plenty in the lives of people who have a need in order to meet those needs. It is only when we as people do a bad job of meeting the needs of those around us do people go hungry, do people have unmet needs. It almost as if we are getting in the way of God's promise. And that's not a good thing. That's a problem that needs to be addressed. Right? It seems like God provided for Paul in lots of ways, not the least of which was through other people. Right? It's the people that Paul is praising here, along with God. Right? More correctly, he praises God for the Philippians, for his friends. He thanks them and he thanks God for them. I'm going to pick up in verse 14 where he really clearly explains. He says, "It was good of you to share in my troubles." Right? So he says, I'm struggling, I have trouble, and you shared my trouble by sacrificing a little bit so that you could make things easier on me. It was like we shared the need. Moreover, verse 15, "As you Philippians know, in the early days of your acquaintance with the gospel, when I set out from Macedonia, not one church shared with me in the matter of giving and receiving except you only." So he's saying, not only have you continued to support me, but remember back in the beginning when I was first kind of getting started, in all of the land around you, you were the only church who continued to support me. Verse 16, "Even when I was in Thessalonica, and you sent me aid more than once when I was in need. Not that I desire your gifts." He's saying, I'm not telling you this because I want you to send me more. He says, I'm okay. What I desire, verse 17, what I desire is that more be credited to your account. So he's giving thanks to God for them. He's saying, I hope that because of your faithfulness, that God will bless you. Verse 18, "I have received full payment, and I have more than enough. I am amply supplied, now that I have received from Epaphroditus the gifts you have sent. They are a fragrant offering, an acceptable sacrifice, pleasing to God." So think about some of the cool things that Paul did when he was on his missionary journeys. The people that he reached, the amazing stories like the shipwreck where he was bitten by a snake but was unharmed and was able to preach to the sailors and the prisoners. Think about the very beginning when he was on the road and God appeared to him in that bright light and he had this revelation. Right? Think about the individual churches that he started and the wisdom in the letters that he wrote. None of that would be possible. He would not have been able to do those things if it weren't for his fellow Christians giving to him and supporting him in those ways. Right? He has dedicated his life to spreading the gospel, and in return, some people are saying, okay, we're going to participate in that by making sure that when you get to a new city, you don't have to worry about what you're going to eat or where you're going to sleep. And that frees Paul up to do more of the work of the gospel. Right? It would have at least been much harder without this. And I think the world would be different if people didn't provide for people in need. It would be much worse. So if it weren't for the Philippians, Paul might not have been able to do what he did. All right? Yes, Paul says he can do all things through Christ who strengthens him. That's that famous verse that a lot of us know. But in the very next verse, he says it was still good that the Philippians shared, and he was grateful for it. Because it's through the Philippians that God strengthens him. It's through the people around us that God works. So I want to challenge you with this, what I think is a very obvious truth. We have things so that we can give. Right? If we have more than enough, the reason we have more than enough is so that we can give, so that we can help meet needs. And that might be money, but it might also be time. It might be attention. It might be energy and effort. We have so that we can give. God has given you things so that you can help provide for people who need it, right? You might not have as much as you like. You might not have as much as the person next to you. You certainly don't have as much as, the very wealthy, but you have something. And your challenge is to ask yourself, really understand, what is it that I have that is more than what I need? And really trying to understand, what is it of the things we have that are needs and what is more than enough? And I know that you're teenagers, but I think that you're ready to hear this. I think that you're ready to define this for yourself, right? That what is my needs and what is more than enough? And once you've defined that, I think you become much freer and much more able to really do the work of helping people when they need it. Because if you hold on to things when there are others who do without, then you disrupt the potential of the gospel. You stand in the way of the potential to advance the cause of Christ, and you hurt your own spiritual well-being. Right? If you have and you do not need, and you refuse to help those who do have a need, then you poison your soul. You put yourself in a position where you are standing in the way of God's love, of God taking care of the people who have a need. So I want to challenge you with that. Right? Paul was so grateful for people who had helped him, and it was really a direct result of the people like the church in Philippians supporting Paul. It was a direct result that he was able to continue making these journeys for years and years and years. And thousands of people were reached with the gospel. And because of that, Paul says, "To God and Father be glory forever and ever." Right? The grace of the Lord Jesus Christ be with your spirit. He's praising God for them. He's thanking God for them. Paul leaned heavily on his fellow Christians, and they supported him. And it's time that we do the same. So I want to challenge you again to pray for that God will cause us to feel the same urgency to help our brothers and sisters that the Philippians felt for Paul. That's a wrap on the book of Philippians. We've made it through 8 weeks now. Next week, we're going to do something different. I don't exactly know what that looks like yet, but what I would love for you to do is go down into the description of the video. There's a link to a survey. It's only 3 questions. And I would like you to answer those 3 questions as honestly as you can. You do not put your name on it. You can be brutally honest with me and tell me exactly what you're thinking. And that's going to really help me sort of shape the direction for this channel and what we do going forward in the weeks to come. We did get some really good news this week. We are starting to see the very first tiny steps towards returning to normal. And we don't know exactly what that's going to look like as a church yet. You should expect us to know pretty soon. But for now, just hang on to what we've got. Keep going on. All right, we're gonna continue on with these video series for the time being, and I hope to see you all again real soon.